Globalization. This advertisement shown about globalization. From this advertisement, we came to know that Chinese students came to India to learn Indian languages. This advertisement was published in one of the London magazines. To 1,000 Indian readers, it seems to be suggesting that countries like China are turning to India and learning Indian languages. This could be to communicate with Indian traders and manufacturers, or to train Chinese workers who want to go to India to find work, etc. Thus, we can see several dimensions of globalization in this advertisement. Globalization is a major change that occurred across the globe in the late 20th century. The interconnectedness across countries on many dimensions such as cultural, political, social, and economical is globalization. Some of these aspects of service sector where new job opportunities like call centers are emerging. We shall also recognize that there is a large number of consumer products available in the market. We identify three types of movements within international economic exchanges. The first is the flow of trade in goods as well as services. The second is the flow of labor. The migration of people in search of employment. The third is the movement of capital for short-term or long-term term investments over long distances. Besides, there are political and cultural dimensions of globalization. For instance, last year, several nations in Western Asia and Northern Africa, like Tunisia, Egypt, were influenced by each other's revolutions and uprooting of dictators. This was called Arab Spring in the media. Media played a crucial role in these countries. Television channels that were owned and run by people from other countries supported such mobilization, which resulted in regulating the powers of local leaders. While events like civil war or natural disasters like tsunami are discussed within national boundaries, they also receive support and sympathy from around the world. Globalization is not merely about the market ideas, but also being shared and expanded. 19th century labor migration. Many think of globalization as a late 20th century phenomenon. While it is true that the present form of globalization has emerged in the last 30 to 40 years, there have been important phases in the history of the world when nations have been interconnected. The 19th century witnessed an accelerated pace of foreign trade, foreign investment, and labor migration. Though labor movement was not as free as movements of goods and capital, it is estimated that nearly 50 million people emigrated from Europe to America and Australia. All over the world, some 150 million are estimated to have left their homes. Hundreds of thousands of Indian and Chinese laborers went to work on plantations, in mines, and in road and railway construction projects around the world as part of the colonial plan. Many of these were indentured migrants. Indentured laborer is a bonded laborer under contract to work for an employer for a specific amount of time to pay off his passage to a new country or home. The main destinations of Indian indentures migrants were the Caribbean island, Mauritius, Fiji, Malaya, Ceylon, etc. Living and working conditions were often harsh and there were few legal rights. Many migrants settled permanently in the destination countries and thus emerged new blends of cultural expressions. It is noteworthy that such huge movement of laborers has not been observed in the recent experiences of globalization. Today, there is demand for migration from professional people, but this is often restricted, leading to issues of conflict. Production across countries. Until the middle of the 20th century, production was largely organized within countries. Only raw materials, foodstuff, and finished products were exported to other countries. India exported raw materials and foodstuff and improved finished goods. Trade was the main channel connecting distant countries. Towards the end of the 20th century, large companies called multinational corporations emerged in the scene. An MNC is a company that owns or controls production in more than one nation. MNCs set up offices and factories for production in regions where they can get cheaper labor and other resources. The cost of production is reduced considerably due to cheap labor and the MNCs earn great profits. Consider the following example. A large MNC producing industrial equipment designs its products in research centers in the United States and then has the components manufactured in China. These are then shipped to Mexico and Eastern Europe, where the products are assembled and the finished products are sold at all over the world. Meanwhile, the company's customer care is carried out through call center located in India. In this example, the MNC not only sells their finished products globally, the goods and services are also produced globally. As a result, production is organized in increasingly complex ways. The production process is divided into small parts and spread out across the globe. In the above example, China provides the advantage of being a cheap manufacturing location. Mexico and Eastern Europe are useful for their closeness to the markets in the US and Europe. India has educated English-speaking youth who can provide customer care services. And all this probably can mean 50 to 60% savings for the MNC. The advantage of spreading out production across the borders to the multinationals can be truly immense. Interlinking production across countries. MNCs look into four major criteria before they set up production in any place. The factory or company should be close to the markets. Skilled and unskilled labor should be available at low costs. Availability of other factors of production should be assured. Local government policies should be in their interests. When the above conditions are to their satisfaction, MNCs set up factories and offices for production in different countries. As these MNCs are setting up factories in a foreign country, the investment they make in terms of acquiring land, construction buildings, and buying machinery is called foreign investment. At times, MNCs set up production jointly with the local companies of these countries. Then local companies benefit in two ways from this joint venture. MNCs provide money for additional investments like buying new machinery for fast production. MNCs introduce the latest technology for production. But the most common route for MNC investments is to buy up local companies and then to expand production. MNCs with huge wealth can quite easily do so. For example, Cargill Foods, a very large American MNC, has brought over smaller Indian companies such as Parka Foods. Parka Foods has 4 oil refineries and a large marketing network in various parts of India. Where its brand well reputed with the takeovers, Cargill is now the largest producer of edible oil in India. In fact, many of the top MNCs have wealth exceeding the entire budget of the developing country governments. With such enormous wealth, imagine the power and influence of these MNCs. There is another way in which MNCs control production. Large MNCs in developed countries place orders for production with small producers. Garments, footwear, sports items. The products are supplied to the MNCs, which then sell these under their own brand names to the customers. These large MNCs have tremendous power to determine price, quality, and deliver and labor conditions for these distant products. As a result of the MNCs, production in widely depressed locations is getting interlinked. Ford Motors, an American company, is one of the world's largest automobile manufacturers, with production spread over 26 countries of the world. Ford Motors came to India in 1995 and spent rupees 1700 crore to set up a large plant near Chennai. This was done in collaboration with Mahindra and Mahindra, a major Indian manufacturer of jeeps and trucks. By the year 2004, Ford Motors were selling 27,000 cars in the Indian market, while 24,000 cars were exported from India to South Africa, Mexico, and Brazil. The company wants to develop Ford India as a component supplying base for its other plants across the globe.
Foreign trade and integration of market. For a long time, foreign trade has been the main channel connecting countries. Even as early as the 8th century, extensive trade took place between South Asia, including India, and the East and West. Trading interests attracted various trading companies such as the East India Company to India. The benefits of foreign trade were tremendous. Foreign trade created an opportunity for the producers to reach beyond the domestic markets, that is, markets of their own countries. Producers could compete in markets located in other countries of the world. Expanding foreign trade gave consumers a wider choice of goods beyond what is domestically produced. So, due to foreign trade and integration of markets, goods travel from one market to another. Choice of goods in markets rises. Prices of similar goods in the two where it is produced and where it is sold tend to become equal. Producers in the two countries compete against each other, even though they are separated by thousands of miles. Foreign trade thus resulted in connecting the markets or integration of markets in different countries. Chinese manufacturers started exporting plastic toys to India. Buyers in India now have the option of choosing between Indian and the Chinese toys. Because of the cheaper prices and new designs, Chinese toys become popular in the Indian markets. Within a year, 70 to 80% of the toy shops have replaced Indian toys with Chinese toys. Toys are now cheaper in the Indian markets than earlier. For the Chinese toy makers, this trade provided an opportunity to expand their business. The opposite is true for Indian toy makers. Competition has forced some of the Indian producers to innovate, whereas others have perished.
MNCs and globalization. In the past 3 or 4 decades, more and more MNCs have been looking for the locations around the world which would be cheap for their production. Foreign investments by MNCs in these countries has been rising. At the same time, foreign trade between countries has been rising rapidly. A large part of the foreign trade is also controlled by MNCs. For instance, the car manufacturing plant of Ford Motors in India not only produces cars for the Indian markets, it also exports cars to other developing countries and exports car components for its many factories around the world. Likewise, activities of most MNCs involve substantial trade in goods and also services. The result of greater foreign investment and greater foreign trade has been greater integration of production and markets across countries. Globalization is the process of rapid integration or interconnection between countries. MNCs are playing a major role in the globalization process. More and more goods and services, investments and technology are moving between countries. Most regions of the world are in closer contact with each other than a few decades back. The flow of capital, people, technology is supposed to have created a borderless world. As a result, states lose power to determine many aspects of life even within their boundaries. For instance, the most important decision regarding the value of a currency which were at the high point of the nation state made by sovereign governments are today made outside government corridors and more often by market players and forces over which governments have very little control. Factors that have enabled globalization. Technology, rapid improvement in technology has been one more factor that has stimulated the globalization process. For instance, the past 50 years have seen several improvements in transportation technology. As a result, goods are delivered faster across long distances at lower cost and in the movement of people from one country to another in a short time. Information and communication technology has played a major role in spreading out production of services across countries. Many MNCs are service-based companies, therefore the transfer of information is very vital to them. Computers, internet facilities, telegraph, telephones, mobile phones and fax are used to contact one another around the world. To access information instantly and to communicate from remote areas. This has been facilitated by satellite communication devices. Internet also allows us to send instant electronic mail and talk across the world at negligible costs. A new magazine published for London readers is to be designed and printed in Delhi. The designers in the Delhi office get instructions on how to design the magazine from the office in London using telecommunication facilities. The designing is done on a computer. After printing, the magazines are sent by air to London. Even the payment of money for designing and printing from a bank in London to a bank in Delhi is done instantly through the internet. Liberalization of foreign trade and foreign investment policy. Let us see the example of imports of Chinese toys in India. Suppose the Indian government puts a tax on import of toys, and because of the tax, buyers will have to pay a higher price on imported toys. Chinese toys will no longer be as cheap in the Indian markets, and imports from China will automatically reduce. Indian toy makers will prosper. Tax on imports is an example of trade barrier. Because some restrictions has been set up, governments use trade barriers to increase or decrease foreign trade and to decide what kinds of goods and how much of each should come into the country. The Indian government, after independence, has put barriers to foreign trade and foreign investment. This was considered necessary to protect the producers within the country from foreign competition. Industries were just coming up in the 1950s and 60s, and competition from imports at this stage would not have allowed these industries to survive. Thus, India allowed imports of only essential items such as machinery, fertilizers, petroleum, etc. Remember that all developed countries during the early stages of development have given protection to domestic producers through a variety of means. However, starting around 1991, some far-reaching changes in policy were made in India. The government decided that the time had come for Indian producers to compete with producers around the globe. It felt that competition would improve the performance of producers within the country since they would have to improve their quality. This decision was supported by powerful international organizations. Thus, barriers on foreign trade and foreign investment were removed to a large extent. This meant that goods could be imported and exported easily, and also foreign companies could set up factories and offices here. Removing barriers or restrictions set by the government is known as liberalization. With liberalization of trade, businesses are allowed to make decisions freely about what they wish to import or export. The government imposes much less restrictions than before and is therefore said to be more liberal. Economic proponents of globalization argue that it is economic forces that are responsible for globalization and control its contours and borders. Those holding the political line argue it is the government's decision that allows movement in the first place. Government place restrictions or ease regulations. The attractiveness and unattractiveness of places has to do with the political climate and not necessarily the market conditions, and therefore territory still matters. In reality, both are connected. You must remember that political decisions are taken in a particular context, which accounts for the economic and technological change that has already taken place. Thus, the rapid improvement in technology and the liberalization of foreign policies paved the way for globalization in India. Institutions of global governance. Today, many decisions on key issues that affect large parts of the world are taken by institutions of global governance. A good example is the issue of climate change. Initially, the issue of reducing carbon emission was left to individual countries. However, it was soon found that if one country were to attempt to reduce carbon emission, industry could just shift to another location where there are fewer regulations. Consequently, the issue of emissions and climate change has to be tackled by countries coming together. Let us look at another institution of global governance, the WTO, in slightly more details. World Trade Organization. Just now, we have discussed that the liberalization of foreign trade and investments in India was supported by some very powerful international organizations. These organizations say that barriers to foreign trade and investment are harmful. Trade between countries should be free without any barriers. World Trade Organization is one such organization whose aim is to liberalize international trade. It was started at the initiative of the developed countries. WTO establishes rules regarding international trade and sees that laws are obeyed. Nearly 150 countries of the world are currently members of the WTO. Though WTO is supported to allow free trade for all, in practice it is seen that the developed countries have unfairly retained trade barriers. On the other hand, WTO rules have forced the developing countries to remove trade barriers. An example of this is the current debate on trade in agriculture products. The agriculture sector provides the bulk of employment in India. Compare this to a developed country such as the US, with the share of agriculture in GDP at 1% and its share in the total employment a tiny 0.5%. And yet, these very small percentages of people who are engaged in agriculture in US receive massive sums of money from the US government for production and for exports to other countries. Due to the massive money that they receive, US farmers can sell their farm products at abnormally low prices. The surplus farm products are sold in other country markets at low prices, adversely affecting farmers in these countries. Developing countries are, therefore, asking the developed countries' governments, we have reduced trade barriers as per WTO rules. But you have ignored the rules of WTO and have continued to pay your farmers vast sums of money. Impact of globalization in India. Globalization has been of advantage to consumers, particularly the well-off sections in the urban areas. There is a great choice between these consumers who now enjoy improved qualities and lower prices for several products. As a result, these people today enjoy much higher standards of living than was possible earlier. Among producers and workers, the impact of globalization has not been uniform. Firstly, MNCs have increased their investments in India, which means investing in India has been beneficial for them. MNCs have been interested in industries such as cell phones, automobiles, and electronics, soft drinks, fast food, or service such as banking in urban areas. These producers have a large number of well-off buyers in these industries, and services new jobs have been created. Also, local companies supplying raw materials, etc. to these industries have prospered. Secondly, several of the top Indian companies have been able to benefit from the increased competition. They have invested in newer technology and production methods and raised their production standards. Some have gained from successful collaborations with foreign companies. Moreover, globalization has enabled some large Indian companies to emerge as multinationals themselves. Tata Motors, Infosys, Ranbaxy, Asian Paints, Sundaram Fasteners are some Indian companies which are spreading their operations worldwide. Globalization has also created new opportunities for Indian companies providing services, particularly in the IT field. Services such as data entry, accounting, and administrative tasks are now being done cheaply in India and exported to developed countries. This has generated thousands of jobs. In the recent years, the central and state governments in India are taking special steps to attract foreign companies to invest in India. Industrial zones called special economic zones are being set up. SCERTs are to have world-class facilities, electricity, water, road and transport and storage, recreational and educational facilities. Companies who set up production units in the SCERTs do not have to pay taxes for an initial period of 5 years. Government has also allowed flexibility in the labor laws to attract foreign investments. Instead of hiring workers on a regular basis, companies hire workers flexible for short period when there is intense pressure of work. This is done to reduce the cost of labor for the company. However, foreign companies are demanding further flexibility in labor laws. Small producers compete or perish. For a large number of small producers and workers, globalization has posed major challenges. Ravi did not expect that he would have to face a crisis in a short period of his life as an industrialist. Ravi took a loan from the bank to start his own company producing capacitors in 1992 in Hosur, an industrial town in Tamil Nadu. Capacitors are used in many electronic home appliances including tube lights, televisions, etc. Within 3 years, he was able to expand production and had 20 workers under him. His struggle to run his company started when the government removed restrictions on imports of capacitors as per the agreement at WTO in 2001. His main clients, the television companies, used to buy different components, including capacitors in bulk for the manufacturers of television sets. However, competition from the MNC brands forced the Indian television companies to move into assembling activities for MNCs. even when some of them brought capacitors, they would prefer to import, as the price of the imported item was half the price charged by people like Ravi. Ravi now produces less than half the capacitors that he produced in the year 2000 and has only 7 workers working for him. Many of Ravi's friends in the same business in Hyderabad and Chennai have closed their units. The struggle for a fair globalization. The above evidence indicates that not everyone has benefited from globalization. People with education, skill, and wealth have made the best use of the new opportunities. On the other hand, there are many people who have not shared the benefits. Since globalization is now a reality, the question is how to make globalization more fair. Fair globalization would create opportunities for all and also ensures that benefits of globalization are shared better. The government can play a major role in ensuring that the fruits of globalization reach everyone. The educated and the uneducated, equally, its policies must protect the interests not only of the rich and the powerful, but also the people in the country. The Indian government should ensure that labor laws are properly implemented and the workers get their rights. The government should support small producers to improve their performance till the time they become strong enough to compete. If necessary, the government should use trade and investment barriers. The government should negotiate at the WTO for fairer rules. It can also align with other developing countries with similar interests to fight against the domination of developed countries in the WTO. Massive campaigns and representation by people's organizations have influenced important decisions related to trade and investment at the WTO. This has demonstrated that people also can play an important role in the struggle for fair globalization. Other issues. An important issue that has been debated is whether globalization has seen the demise of national state or not. For most part of the time, the nation state with people organized on territorial grounds was the main form of political organization when it came to demarcating countries. This territorial division created divisions of us and them, of outside and inside, and laid the psychological foundations for creating a feeling for one's own country, the feeling of nationalism. The single most important impact of globalization is the gradual dilution of this feeling. Another issue that received attention is about whether globalization leads to cultural homogenization or increased cultural diversity. While some argue that the impact of modern communication and technology has led to the spread of certain cultures and ideas which has marginalized local and small cultures, others argue that globalization has also given space to and allowed the spread of distinctive and often marginalized cultural practices. It has been pointed out that while some languages have become widely used and are the languages of international communication, others have been neglected and some are on the verge of extinction. WB and IMF and their power. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the International Development Association are referred as World Bank. Both these institutions have more than 170 members each. Countries like United States of America control the functioning of these institutions. Even today, USA's voting is valued at 16%. Few other countries like Japan, Germany, United Kingdom, France have more than 3 to 6% voting powers. Value of voting by the poorer countries is lower. Today, India or China do have much more voting powers than poorer countries. World Bank is able to advise and impact the way governments frame their policies and guide them. Conclusion. Globalization is the process of rapid integration of countries. It is a major change that occurred across the globe in the late 20th century. This has political, economic, as well as cultural dimensions. Integration of markets and production through trade and investments controlled by the multinational corporations with huge wealth and power is one hallmark of the present phase of globalization. Liberalization by removing barriers to trade and investment has opened the economies to the forces of globalization. The benefits of globalization have been unevenly distributed. It has benefited well-off consumers and also producers with skill, education, and huge wealth. Certain services enabled with technology have expanded. On the other hand, thousands of small producers and workers have seen their employment and workers' right erode. It is important to understand the two-sided nature of globalization. The other dimension of inequality which we saw is in the dominating influence of the rich countries and matter of policy. Be it policies or international economic exchange, trade, investment, migration, or domestic matters, rich Western countries have an undue influence over the rest of the world. International organizations like WTO, WB, and the IMF represents the interests of the developed countries far more than that of the developing world. Thus, while the supporters of globalization speak on the advantages of global integration and see globalization as an opportunity for growth and prosperity, its critics point out that it harms democracy, workers' rights, and the environment in many of the poorer countries.